Hello and welcome along to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Ed McKnight.
And I'm Andrew Nicol.
And today on the show, we're talking about adding a bedroom to a property. And we are very pleased to be joined by friend of the show, Ilse Wolfe from Opus Accelerate. Now, Ilse, this has been one of the most requested podcast episodes because adding a bedroom is the number one cash flow hack we always talk about. It increases the rent, it increases the value of the property. So how do you do it? What are some of the common mistakes that people make? That's what we're going to cover in this show. But Andrew, I know that you wanted to get the first question in.
Let's start out with, you walk into an open home or a house that you own already at the moment or an investor owns. How do you actually decide where to put the bedroom? What are you looking for? Are you turning a kitchen into it? Are you looking for extra space in lounges, second lounges, dining rooms? What actually helps you decide this is the right area to put an extra bedroom?
Yeah, great question. Well, it is the number one principle for cash flow hacking is adding that extra bedroom for both a cash flow need, especially being an existing property, the properties that we look for, looking to offset that increased cost with the interest non-deductibility these days, and also value add, adding a bedroom at significant six-figure value, basically anywhere in New Zealand in this current market. The key things that we're looking for, I'll just take a step back because even before we get to site, what's a third or a quarter of us are in lockdown right now. So even before being able to get to site, you really need to have the ability to understand how you can decipher and interpret the information that's purely on the online listing if we can't make those physical viewings, either in Hamilton or Auckland right now. So there are a couple of key things that you need to start by looking for before you invest too much time. And two key aspects there are the overall layout of the house. If we're looking at a 50s, 60s, or 70s, perhaps even 80s layout of a house, there is often some superfluous space with a formal dining room area that is often a connecting room between almost a roundabout walking through from a living room through the dining and backwards through a kitchen. And being a dated property means that the current flow of the house is actually not current for the modern lifestyle. On top of that, if the kitchen is particularly outdated, that opens up more opportunity because then you can look to perhaps reconfigure that space. But overall, seems to be that we no longer need these formal dining spaces in many places where the prices are affordable enough to be an investment, that we can repurpose and put up superficial walls to turn the dining space into that extra bedroom. Most commonly for a layout, it might be from a 3-bedroom to a 4 in this instance. The second other crucial point, which is more of a quantifiable measure, is the overall floor size of that property. If we think about, say, a typical 1960s or 70s house that is a 3-bedroom property, it's probably going to be around a 90 or 95 square meter house. And depending on the proportions of the kitchen, dining, and lounge, we may be able to add in the bedroom through the dining room space. But sometimes we find these anomalies where the house may be slightly smaller or more of a tight squeeze around that 80 to 85 square meter. You have to use your own judgment by, repetition of going into multiple houses or looking at the online information to garner whether that space is usable or not. Some cities, it's quite common where the listings are, say in Hamilton and Auckland, a floor plan with some basic measurements might be provided online, but in other cities it's more difficult. You do need to get to site to really sort of warrant that extra workload. But if you're looking to go from a 2 to 3 bedroom floor size as a general guide, you really want to make sure you have a minimum of 80 square meters for the overall floor size of that dwelling. And as a rule of thumb, going from a 3 to 4 bed, ideally you're looking for a 95 square meter or more. As a slightly separate project, if you are looking for a home and income conversion opportunity, if you're looking to split a large house, generally you want to look at a 135 square meter floor base, or if you have an opportunity that is a top down, where you have, the majority of the house upstairs with perhaps a garage or basement conversion, you're really looking for that maybe 150 to 180 square, and that gives you a prime opportunity.
And let me ask you this also. Let's say that we take that example that you first gave us, which is that we've got a kitchen, a lounge, and a dining room next to each other. The dining room's in the middle of the kitchen and the lounge. Now, let's say you want to turn that dining room into the extra bedroom. So it's got to be in the middle of, say, the kitchen and the lounge. My question is, how much consideration do you give to the flow of the house? Because if you chop off that dining room, then you've still got I suppose, a little awkward hallway connecting the kitchen and the lounge. I know it's going to be specific to the exact house, but how much consideration do you give to the flow when you think about putting that extra bedroom in?
Yeah, it really comes down to the opportunities and the constraints unique to each site. So also, who is the tenant and what type of tenant and what is that location? In your lower socioeconomic areas, it's not quite such a big deal or such a strange thing to see a dining room converted as a fourth bedroom, say, off that living room. What I would suggest is logistically making sure you have enough wall space in the lounge, because often in a lounge and a dining room, sometimes you can see that the window sills are lower than in other bedrooms or in the kitchen, for example. So you need to be cognizant of, okay, if you need to make sure that the resulting space is going to be as usable as possible, because keep in mind that if you're intensifying that living space and adding 1 to 2 more occupants for that tenancy, you need to be mindful of extra furniture, extra space needed for that communal living. So what I would suggest is, in that instance that it does suit, you want to really push the door frame and that door to a suitable place, probably very much towards the end of that main lounge wall, because that gives you maximum wall space for couches, etc. And also the other opportunity with the dining space is that where it has been sort of a walkthrough from the kitchen, often the kitchen bench is almost sort of like a breakfast bar or an island. It gives you a natural ingress where if you do create that bedroom, you can still save the dining room space as area for the bedroom by creating the wardrobe pushing back into the kitchen footprint, and it looks completely organic. That way you're not actually removing or detracting from the usable space of that resulting fourth bedroom as well. The other thing to consider that question is, again, coming back to if the kitchen is really outdated, it's a great opportunity because either you can go through the consent process and look to reconfigure that adjoining wall to the lounge and completely remodel and upgrade the kitchen, or look for ways to slightly enhance or open and adjoin the kitchen lounge through. In some of those older houses, there's quite a large foyer space when you come into the front door. So there are ways to create that flow and make that all feel like it is more the open plan area.
And so, say you've identified the right area that you're going to put this extra bedroom in, and there is, the need to put up a cosmetic wall or to take out some of the plumbing. And how do you actually go about this? How do you put in a cosmetic wall, and what do you need to do to patch up that plumbing?
Yeah, sure. If it is a relatively straightforward dining room conversion to bedroom, which is probably the most common. The key trades that you need are you need your LBP, so licensed building practitioner, who can double as your project manager. The job overall, if it is a simplistic conversion, should take no more than, well, if it's summer or warmer weather months, can be as quick as 1 week turnaround once you have the team really well lined up. Colder winter months where the plaster takes longer, it can actually extend to around 2 weeks. So the first job is there's actually no demolition really if it's infilling the space. So first day is really framing up. You are you are increasing the length to the partition wall between the lounge and that dining space, placing the bedroom door at the far end of that lounge wall, making sure that when you add a pre-hung door, it is swinging to the right orientation to suit that room. You don't want any door handles going through the window of the bedroom because you've parked it up right against the window. Day 2, the builder can be popping up one side of the jib, and this is the opportunity when we say for the electrician, we don't need a plumber in this instance. So with the electrician is really getting them to come in and pre-wire. So sometimes there needs to be a slight rejig of the circuitry. If you have two-way switches between the dining and lounge or the dining and kitchen, the electrician needs to come in and just separate those circuits and reconfigure the switches. And potentially you might need another 1 or 2 double power points put in there, but relatively straightforward job, only a few hours in that day. Once that is done, the builder can be back as soon as day 3, close up the walls, get your jib stopper in to plaster, run the finishing lines, days sort of 3, 4, 5. And then really the following week, allowing for some time to dry if weather is required. Then you can get the painter in for 2, 3 days the following week and you're done.
You make it sound easy.
Well, actually, I thought that sounded quite complicated, but let me ask you this. Let's say we're turning that dining room into a bedroom, and as you said, the windows within that dining room kind of go further down to the floor than would usually be natural in a bedroom. What would you do in that situation? Do you take out the windows and put smaller ones in, or do you just say that's what it's going to be? What would you do in that situation, perhaps?
So one of the main things to consider is the cladding. Depending on the cladding of the property, if it's a brick house, that job becomes more problematic if you would like to change the windows or the joinery. If it's aluminium, that's usually a little easier than trying to retrofit and find the right timber joinery again to match with the house. But also with that cladding, if it is a brick house, needing to brick match is very difficult this number of decades along, and also find a bricklayer. It is actually a bit more of a niche skill these days, and they are in very, very high demand for new builds, so get in line basically. The other thing to consider is really, again, how large a proportion of the walls and that resulting room will be usable. Can you put a set of drawers up if the windowsill is too low? If it is too low, you really need to think about how that space will be usable and what the tenant will need to make work. If you can create the wardrobe to be flush with the wall so that the doors are flush with the wall and therefore you're encroaching back into that walk-through space of the kitchen, that is one way to make sure that you have maximum usable square meter without limiting the number of flat walls that you have. The other opportunity, if your kitchen does need replacing in that site, the other opportunity is actually to push the kitchen through into the dining space, and therefore coming back to that question about flow, you can then replace the old kitchen footprint with usually those high window sills, and also it means that that fourth bedroom will then come back off the hallway. It's much more natural in this instance because you can walk through the living, which will now be a combined living and dining, going around to what was the dining room and making that more of a galley kitchen, often with a breakfast bar, because it adds to that open flow modern style that we would expect to see in a new build, say.
And just for anybody listening as well, that's exactly what you did with the Hamilton Ohapu Road property that we shared on that webinar as well. So if anybody wants to see an example of where Ilse has actually done that with photos, check out the webinar. We'll link it in the show notes, but you can also find that at opuspartners.co.nz/webinar/library, or just the webinar library on there, because I know those photos might help to figure that out.
And so when you're going to a property with one of your investors, what are you usually guiding the investors on? Like, they originally think they're going to put a bedroom here, but you direct them somewhere else, or what's the standard advice that you're giving people?
Yeah, it sort of is in the eye of the beholder. When I'm starting to work with a new client, we onboard them and we go through a whole bunch of rules of thumb, so that it teaches them how to look at limited information, photos, floor plan, the copy and the listing that they'll largely see online, and work out how to decipher that and spot the opportunity. A couple of those being the overall floor layout with some example case studies from what myself or clients have previously executed, and as well as floor size. So a couple of those things help to hint already as to what that opportunity is. What's really interesting is that I might see one opportunity, but my property manager, say in Whangarei, who's incredibly proactive, is happy to go to site for a client if they're outside of town and for lockdown reasons can't get to site. She will go and spot something else completely different. So it's not always just that there's a single option there. Often with the same sort of 70s and 80s houses, sometimes you can find that on what is usually the shallower side of the hallway with the laundry and the bathroom, sometimes there is some wasted space. So if there's a way to more efficiently integrate the laundry into a bathroom, or if there's a way to repurpose some space to a bedroom in that way, that also works. So depending on, it's really down to what you can spot and what you've learned and how you can process the information into the opportunity. The key thing is to make sure, if you're adding the bedroom, that you really want to get a minimum of 7 or 8 square meters plus wardrobe. Anything less than that is quite a contrived single bedroom. Yeah. If you cannot get a wardrobe in there, it really starts to look like a study or office, and it's not as practical. It won't add as much value because it just won't feel like a legitimate bedroom.
And let me ask you this before we wrap up. What are some common mistakes or issues that people run into when they try and do it either on the cheap, or they don't get proper advice about this, they try and DIY it? What are some common problems that people listening to the show could avoid?
Sure. Well, one of the examples of what not to do that I share in the onboarding support material for my clients is there was a listing I came across in Enderley in Hamilton where someone had actually tried to flip a unit, which was a 1-bedroom unit. It had a 3 times 4 square meter, so a 12 square meter bedroom. They'd crudely propped up a partition wall straight up the middle of it and added a door to the other side. So you basically had 2 single beds up against either side of this wall, It was the most contrived thing. It was clearly one bedroom. Someone had to just flip and sell as two. So there are definitely ways to not do this. That is one example I would say just do not try and create, because if it feels contrived, if it doesn't feel organic to the floor plan and the flow of the house, like my big fat fail in Lucerne Road and Remuera, it just didn't quite work. So don't force something just for the sake of it. You need to pre-qualify that the layout of the house, the tenant who will be in there at the end will like it, that it actually adds the value you intend, and that it fits. It needs to fit. Another common mistake is when you don't bring in the professionals to validate the plan. Any wall movements, which can be done if they're non-load bearing, you want that verified by a licensed builder or engineer to absolutely make sure you are not compromising the integrity of that building or getting yourself in trouble with council further down the track. This will financially detract from your sale price as well, not to mention getting into due diligence sales and then the buyer looking to negotiate you down. So you want to do it properly, bring in the professionals. And the other consideration is that, just keep in mind, if you're adding a bedroom, you are adding to that intensification. You are adding to the number of occupants who will be coming to that tenancy. You need to also, therefore, think about the wider context of amenity. If I'm going from a 2 to a 3 bedroom, potentially keeping the one bathroom scenario is okay. If you are moving from a 3 to a 4 bed or a 4 to a 5, depending on location, you may need to add that second bathroom or certainly a second toilet, and that will require council consent, building consent for that. The other thing to think about is the exterior, so actually the parking amenity. Depending on the council, there will be a certain off-street parking requirement. If you are converting one large house into a home and income situation, the main house must have at least 2 off-street parks, and the second ancillary dwelling must have at least 1. So there are council controls, planning controls to make sure that you are adding value, but in a regulated, appropriate way. So those are some of the mistakes that I see being made, and it is up to the investor to run that due diligence and make sure that from all angles that value add is going to be appropriate before committing to the purchase.
And the other thing that I've just picked up as well, also, is it seems like there is a fair amount of kind of interior design, I would call it, that can be used or is necessary in order to make it feel more natural. So, for instance, the one on Ohapu Road that you shared in Hamilton, where because the lounge come dining then had the big modern kitchen put in, felt really normal for today's tenants. Whereas, if it perhaps looked more like a traditional kitchen, would have felt really, really odd. So, you've almost got to have a decent design eye within what you're doing as well to make it feel natural, and obviously you've got that, and Andrew and I clearly don't, because we'd be painting walls all different colours and still doing feature walls and such things like that. Now, one last question. I know we're running tight on time, but this episode can be a wee bit longer because we did have a question on YouTube. Somebody specifically wanted to know, when you are converting a kitchen into a lounge or to a bedroom, what do you have to do to the plumbing in that older kitchen that you're no longer using as a kitchen?
What I would suggest is that, if you're looking to move any plumbing or change plumbing, you really want to have a look at the building code and then look at the building code exemption file, which is downloadable from every council website, plus just Google it and you'll find it. It's available. In some instances, you can change or move plumbing without consent. But if you are looking to move completely a full kitchen and therefore move the plumbing, or looking to add additional connections for the plumbing, it most likely will require council consent. So you do need to check that out. That will obviously have additional costs, because if you then start upgrading the fittings and you open the walls, you may find some outdated pipes. The plumber is required to upgrade those and sign off with a PS3 document following that to say that what he or she has completed is safe and sanitary. So if you open that can of worms, just be prepared that you may need to upgrade all of the piping, upgrade the fixtures. If there's any particular issue, therefore, with an outdated low-pressure water cylinder, just be prepared that there may be some infrastructural costs that come with that. But as a guide for overall looking to add a bedroom in terms of cost and ROI, the most simple example before with the dining room conversion is definitely a preferable way to go. If you're looking to get maximum financial return on investment, you could complete that work within, say, 1 to 2 weeks. It shouldn't cost any more than $7,000 or $8,000. That's including paint, jib stopper, builder, and electrician, and 1 to 2 weeks for that. And with that, you should get at least that amount in additional rent per annum. So you should get roughly 100% ROI within that first year, which is the best way to go about it if you can.
Fantastic. Let's wrap it up there, but please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And if you want to learn more about how to do more of this stuff, you want more of this sort of content, you got to follow Ilse on Instagram. She is Ilse Wolfe NZ. Google it if you don't know how to spell Ilse, or we'll just drop a link to that in the show notes, because I know Ilse's always sharing a lot of the stuff that she's doing out on the road, which is really interesting and fascinating if you want to learn more about this. Thanks for listening to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Ed McKnight.
And I'm Andrew Nicol.
And we're going to be back again tomorrow with even more daily strategies, tactics, and insights to help you get the most out of the New Zealand property market. Until next time.